Every commercial aircraft in the United States that carries passengers below its cabin floor carries cargo in a compartment classified by the Federal Aviation Administration according to its fire protection capability. A Class C compartment is equipped with smoke detectors and a fire suppression system, typically halon-based, that can be activated from the cockpit. A Class D compartment has neither. It has no smoke detector. It has no suppression system. Its only method of fire control is structural. The compartment is sealed. If a fire ignites inside a Class D hold, the theory is simple. The sealed volume will starve the fire of air. Without fresh oxygen, the fire will exhaust what is available and extinguish itself. No crew intervention is required. No crew awareness is necessary. The fire handles itself, in theory, because the physics of combustion demands a continuous supply of oxidizer. Remove the oxidizer and the reaction stops. This design philosophy was certified in 1966 and remained in effect for 30 years. That was the theory. It worked, but only under one condition: the fire had to need oxygen from the air. On the afternoon of May 11, 1996, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 departed Miami International Airport with 110 people on board. In the forward cargo compartment, a Class D hold, 5 cardboard boxes had been loaded alongside 3 aircraft tires. The boxes were labeled as company material. The shipping ticket described their contents as oxygen canisters. Empty. They were not empty. They were not canisters. They were 144 unexpended chemical oxygen generators, each one a steel cylinder containing sodium chlorate, a percussion cap, and a spring-loaded firing mechanism capable of initiating an exothermic chemical reaction that produces both breathable oxygen and surface temperatures approaching 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The Class D compartment was designed to suppress fire by removing the oxygen. The cargo inside it was designed to produce oxygen. Within 10 minutes of takeoff, every person on that aircraft was dead. The system built to prevent the fire could not function because the cargo itself defeated the only principle on which the system relied. ValuJet Airlines was founded in 1992 and began operations in October 1993. It was a product of the post-deregulation American airline industry, a low-cost carrier built on a model of aggressive expansion and minimal overhead. Within approximately 2.5 years, the airline grew from 2 aircraft to roughly 50. Almost exclusively McDonnell Douglas DC-9s purchased secondhand from other carriers. The business model depended on acquiring aging aircraft at low cost, filling seats at low fares, and outsourcing nearly all heavy maintenance to third-party contractors. This was not illegal. Many airlines outsourced maintenance. But the speed of ValuJet's growth outpaced its ability to oversee the work being done in its name. By early 1996, the FAA had launched a special emphasis inspection of ValuJet's operations, documenting concerns about the airline's oversight of its contract maintenance providers. In 1995, the United States military had refused to allow ValuJet to carry its personnel, citing safety concerns. Internal FAA communications that surfaced after the accident revealed that some agency officials had questioned whether ValuJet should have been permitted to continue flying at all. None of these concerns resulted in the airline being grounded before May 11th. The aircraft operating Flight 592 was a DC-9-32 registration N904VJ, serial number 47377. It had been manufactured in 1969 and originally delivered to Delta Airlines. Delta retired it in 1992, and it was sold to ValuJet the following year through McDonnell Douglas. At the time of the accident, the aircraft was 27 years old. It was powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney JT8D9A turbofan engines. In the 2 years before the crash, the aircraft had experienced a series of incidents, including aborted takeoffs and emergency landings, with engine and pressurization issues among the primary concerns. The forward cargo compartment was certified as a Class D hold under standards dating to 1966. It had no smoke detection equipment. It had no fire suppression equipment. In the cockpit that afternoon were Captain Candlin Kubek and First Officer Richard Hazen. Kubek was 35 years old. She had turned 35 the day before. She had accumulated approximately 9,000 total flight hours, including more than 2,000 on the DC-9. She had learned to fly in high school, attended a collegiate flight program, and built her career through Eastern Airlines and then ValuJet, where she was hired at the airline's founding. She was one of the few women captaining commercial flights in the United States. Hazen was 52, a retired United States Air Force pilot and flight engineer with 20 years of military service and more than 11,000 total flight hours. 3 flight attendants completed the crew. The flight was a routine Saturday afternoon service from Miami to Atlanta, ValuJet's hub. There was nothing in the crew's qualifications, the weather conditions, or the operational profile that suggested anything other than a normal domestic flight. What was not normal was the cargo loaded into the forward hold. In the weeks preceding the accident, ValuJet had contracted SaberTech Corporation, a third-party maintenance facility based at Miami International Airport, to perform maintenance and modifications on several recently acquired McDonnell Douglas MD-80 aircraft. One of the tasks involved inspecting and replacing expired chemical oxygen generators on 2 of these aircraft, registered N802VV and N803VV. Chemical oxygen generators are the devices installed behind panels above passenger seats in many commercial aircraft. If cabin pressure is lost, the panels open and oxygen masks deploy. When a passenger pulls the mask, a lanyard removes a retaining pin from a spring-loaded mechanism. The mechanism strikes a percussion cap containing a small explosive charge, which initiates a chemical reaction in a core of sodium chlorate. The reaction liberates oxygen gas. It is exothermic. This means it produces significant heat as a byproduct. According to the manufacturer's specifications, the exterior surface of an activated generator can reach temperatures of 450 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit during normal operation. The maximum allowable temperature under McDonnell Douglas specifications was 547 degrees Fahrenheit. These are not passive storage containers. They are self-contained chemical devices. When activated, they produce both oxygen and extreme heat for up to 18 to 20 minutes. ValuJet provided SaberTech with a routine work card, designated number 0069, which outlined the step-by-step procedure for removing and replacing the generators. One of the steps on the work card instructed mechanics to install a protective shipping cap on the firing pin of each unexpended generator before removal from the aircraft. The shipping cap is a small plastic device that prevents the percussion cap from being struck accidentally. It is the primary physical safeguard against unintended activation during handling and transport. SaberTech mechanics removed the expired generators from the 2 MD-80 aircraft between February and March of 1996. They did not install the shipping caps. Instead, according to the investigation, some mechanics cut the lanyards attached to the firing pins. Others applied duct tape or consumer-grade adhesive tape around the generators. The work card step requiring the installation of shipping caps was signed off as completed. It had not been completed. The generators, now lacking their primary safety mechanism, were placed in SaberTech's shipping and receiving area. No one communicated to the personnel in that area that the items were hazardous materials. SaberTech had no formal procedure requiring such communication. In early May 1996, a SaberTech stock clerk prepared the generators for shipment back to ValuJet's headquarters in Atlanta. The generators were placed into 5 cardboard boxes, loosely packed with bubble wrap and sealed with tape. The shipping ticket described the contents as oxygen canisters, empty. The word empty was placed in quotation marks on the original document. In reality, the generators were neither canisters nor empty. They were unexpended chemical oxygen generators, each one still containing its full chemical charge, each one still capable of activation, each one still capable of producing 500-degree temperatures. The mislabeling was not a deliberate act of sabotage. It was a failure of knowledge, procedure, and communication. The people handling the generators did not fully understand what they were. The system around them did not require them to. On the morning of May 11th, a SaberTech driver delivered the 5 boxes, along with 3 aircraft tires, to the ValuJet ramp at Miami International Airport. The lead ramp agent showed the shipping ticket to the first officer of Flight 592. According to the ramp agent, neither he nor the first officer discussed the notation describing the contents as empty oxygen canisters. The boxes and tires were loaded into the forward cargo compartment. The cargo door was closed. Somewhere in the stack of cardboard and rubber and steel, 144 firing pins sat exposed, each one held back by nothing more than a spring and a strip of tape. ValuJet was not authorized to carry hazardous materials. The generators were hazardous materials. No one in the chain of handling, from the SaberTech mechanics to the SaberTech stock clerk to the SaberTech driver to the ValuJet ramp agent to the first officer, identified them as such. The NTSB later found that it was not unreasonable for the ramp agents or the flight crew to have accepted the cargo based on how it was presented to them. The failure was systemic. It was distributed across an entire organizational chain. Flight 592 pushed back from the gate shortly before 2:40 in the afternoon, approximately 1 hour and 4 minutes behind schedule. The delay was the result of a mechanical issue involving the right auxiliary hydraulic pump circuit breaker on the inbound flight. The aircraft taxied to runway 9L and was cleared for takeoff at 2:03. Takeoff and initial climb were normal. At 2:04, the crew contacted the departure controller and reported climbing to 5,000 feet. They were subsequently cleared to 7,000. Then instructed to turn left and join the Winco transition with a climb to 16,000 feet. The weather was clear. Both engines were operating normally. The flight data recorder showed stable engine pressure ratios, normal airspeed, and a standard climb profile. For the first 6 minutes after takeoff, nothing about Flight 592 was distinguishable from any other departure out of Miami. 6 minutes. That was all the normalcy they would get. At 14:10 and 3 seconds, approximately 6 minutes after takeoff, an unidentified sound was recorded on the cockpit voice recorder. The flight data recorder showed the aircraft at 10,634 feet, traveling at 260 knots indicated airspeed, with both engine pressure ratios at 1.84. Captain Kubek responded immediately. Her words were precise. She said, "What was that?" 12 seconds later, she stated they had some electrical problem. 5 seconds after that, she said, "We are losing everything." At 14:10 and 22 seconds, Kubek stated that they needed to go back to Miami. 3 seconds later, the cockpit voice recorder captured shouts from the passenger cabin. The voices were loud enough to be recorded through the cockpit door. The words were clear. "Fire, fire, fire, fire." A male voice said, "We are on fire. We are on fire." At 14:10 and 31 seconds, First Officer Hazen transmitted to air traffic control that the flight needed an immediate return to Miami. The departure controller cleared Flight 592 for a left turn to heading 270 and a descent to 7,000 feet. The peak altitude recorded by the flight data recorder at that moment was 10,879 feet. The aircraft had been climbing for less than 7 minutes. What happened next took place over approximately 3 minutes. At 14:10 and 36 seconds, the sounds of shouting from the passenger cabin subsided. The controller asked what kind of problem they were having. The captain said fire. The first officer said smoke in the cockpit, smoke in the cabin. The controller instructed them, when able, to turn left to heading 250 and descend to 5,000 feet. At 14:11 and 12 seconds, a flight attendant's voice was recorded shouting the words "completely on fire." 3 words. They marked the boundary between an emergency and a catastrophe. This was possible only because ValuJet's cockpit cabin interphone system was inoperative on this aircraft. The flight attendant manual instructed cabin crew not to open the cockpit door when smoke or harmful gases were present in the cabin, but with no interphone, opening the door was the only way to communicate with the pilots. So the door opened, and when it did, it brought the fire into the cockpit, not as flame, but as heat and smoke, and the knowledge that the aircraft was burning from beneath. At 14:11 and 37 seconds, the first officer requested the closest available airport. This was the last clear communication from the crew requesting navigational assistance. At 14:11 and 45 seconds, A 1-minute and 12-second interruption in the cockpit voice recorder began. The cause of this interruption was never determined with certainty, but it is consistent with electrical power disruption caused by the fire. The flight data recorder continued for approximately another minute after the CVR interruption began. At 14:12 and 48 seconds, the FDR recorded its last data point. The aircraft was at 7,200 feet, traveling at 260 knots, on a heading of 218 degrees. Air traffic control attempted to reach the crew multiple times after this point. There was no response. At 14:13 and 42 seconds, the aircraft struck the ground in the Florida Everglades, approximately 17 miles northwest of Miami International Airport. The impact occurred in a right-wing down, nose-down attitude, in a nearly vertical dive. Witnesses described a steep right bank that increased until the nose dropped and the aircraft plunged into the swamp. The impact speed was in excess of 500 miles per hour. The aircraft was destroyed. There were no survivors. The NTSB's investigation determined that the fire originated in the forward cargo compartment. The sequence, as reconstructed, began with the activation of one or more chemical oxygen generators, most likely triggered by a physical jolt during taxi or early climb. Once activated, the generators began producing oxygen and generating extreme heat. The heat ignited surrounding materials, the cardboard boxes, the bubble wrap, and, critically, the aircraft tires loaded alongside them. Under normal circumstances, a fire in a Class D cargo hold would consume the available oxygen within the sealed volume and self-extinguish. But the chemical oxygen generators were continuously producing new oxygen. The fire did not run out of air. It had an unlimited supply. The fire suppression principle on which the Class D compartment relied, oxygen deprivation, was irrelevant. The fire grew unchecked. It burned upward through the cargo compartment ceiling into the cabin floor structure. Examination of recovered wreckage revealed that the left side floor beams above the cargo compartment had melted and collapsed before impact. This structural failure would have compromised the flight control cables routed beneath the cabin floor on the captain's side. The NTSB concluded that the fire caused progressive failure of the aircraft's electrical and flight control systems. The flight data recorder data showed degrading control authority in the minutes before impact. The crew's ability to control the aircraft diminished as the fire consumed the structural and mechanical pathways between the cockpit and the control surfaces. The human factors dimension of this accident is defined not by error, but by impossibility. Kubek and Hazen were presented with a fire that was already beyond containment before they became aware of it. The first indication of a problem, the unidentified sound at 14:10 and 3 seconds, came approximately 6 minutes after takeoff. By that point, the fire in the cargo hold had likely been burning for some time, possibly since the aircraft was still on the ground. The crew had no smoke detector alert because there was no smoke detector. They had no fire suppression because there was no suppression system. Their first awareness came from electrical anomalies and cabin crew reports. The total time from the first cockpit indication to impact was 3 minutes and 39 seconds. To understand the cognitive demands placed on the crew in that interval, it is necessary to consider what they were being asked to process simultaneously. They were diagnosing an electrical failure of unknown origin. They were managing a return to an airport they had just departed. They were communicating with air traffic control. They were receiving information from cabin crew about conditions behind them that they could not see. They were attempting to follow emergency checklists designed for scenarios in which the underlying cause of the emergency is known. In this case, the cause was not known. The crew did not know there was cargo fire. They knew there was smoke. They knew they were losing electrical power. They knew there was fire somewhere in or near the cabin. They did not know that the fire was beneath them, in a compartment they had no means of monitoring. Fed by a chemical reaction they had no means of stopping. The cognitive load was extreme. The information was incomplete. The time was insufficient. Under these conditions, even the most experienced crew in the world would not have been able to save the aircraft. This was not a survivable emergency. It was an emergency in which the time between awareness and structural failure was shorter than the time required to resolve it. In that window, The crew identified the nature of the emergency, communicated with air traffic control, began a return to Miami, attempted to manage smoke in the cockpit, and tried to maintain control of a deteriorating aircraft. They performed these tasks in a cockpit that was filling with smoke and heat, with degrading instruments, with failing electrical systems, and with flight controls that were being physically destroyed beneath them. The NTSB noted that the crew had begun executing portions of ValuJet's emergency procedures for handling smoke. Evidence from the recovered outflow valve was consistent with the crew having manually opened it, which is part of the smoke removal procedure. The last recorded verbalization by the captain was at 14:10 and 49 seconds. The last by the first officer was at 14:11 and 38 seconds. The NTSB stated that it could not rule out the possibility that the flight crew was incapacitated by smoke or heat in the cockpit during the last 7 seconds before impact. The crew did not fail. They were placed in an unrecoverable situation by a chain of failures that occurred entirely outside their knowledge or control. The point at which recovery became structurally impossible cannot be identified with a single timestamp. But the investigation's analysis of the flight control degradation suggests that by the time the cockpit voice recorder lost power, the aircraft's control systems had been critically compromised. The fire had been burning beneath the cabin floor for several minutes. The floor beams had begun to melt. The control cables were damaged or severed. The aircraft entered a steep descent from which recovery was no longer aerodynamically possible. No pilot action available at that stage could have altered the outcome. The fire had already decided. Recovery operations in the Everglades were among the most difficult in American aviation history. The crash site was in the Francis S. Taylor Wildlife Management Area, a deepwater sawgrass swamp with a limestone floor, accessible only by airboat. The nearest road was more than a quarter of a mile away. The aircraft had disintegrated on impact. No large sections of the fuselage remained. Recovery personnel worked in water populated by alligators and snakes, with constant risk of bacterial infection from contaminated wounds. The recovery effort lasted several weeks. Of the 110 people on board, approximately 68 were identified, some through dental records, some through jawbone analysis, and in at least one case from a single tooth. A piece of recovered tissue was identified as belonging to First Officer Hazen. Captain Kubek's remains were never found. Of the crew, she was the only one for whom no physical trace was recovered. The NTSB's final report, adopted on August 19, 1997, assigned probable cause to 3 parties equally. This was an extraordinary finding. The board determined that the probable causes of the accident, which resulted from a fire in the airplane's Class D cargo compartment initiated by the actuation of one or more oxygen generators being improperly carried as cargo, were first, the failure of SaberTech to properly prepare, package, and identify unexpended chemical oxygen generators before presenting them to ValuJet for carriage. Second, the failure of ValuJet to properly oversee its contract maintenance program to ensure compliance with maintenance training, and hazardous materials requirements and practices. Third, the failure of the Federal Aviation Administration to require smoke detection and fire suppression systems in Class D cargo compartments. The board also identified contributing factors. These included the FAA's failure to adequately monitor ValuJet's heavy maintenance programs and its oversight of contractors, the FAA's failure to adequately respond to prior chemical oxygen generator fires, and ValuJet's failure to ensure that both ValuJet and contract maintenance facility employees were aware of the carrier's no-carry hazardous materials policy and had received appropriate training. The inclusion of the FAA as a co-probable cause, not merely a contributing factor, was virtually unprecedented. Board member John Goglia also successfully argued that ValuJet should be elevated from contributing factor to probable cause, establishing the principle that an airline cannot outsource its responsibility for safety. The NTSB's report stated directly that had the FAA required fire and smoke detection and fire extinguishment systems in Class D cargo compartments, as the Safety Board had recommended in 1988, ValuJet Flight 592 would likely not have crashed. This was not a new concern. In 1986, an American Trans Air DC-10 had been destroyed on the ground at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport by a fire caused by chemical oxygen generators. In February 1988, a cargo hold fire aboard American Airlines Flight 132 caused by hazardous materials on an MD-83 was contained only because the crew was able to land safely. Following that incident, the NTSB issued safety recommendations A88-122 and A88-123, calling for smoke detection and fire suppression in all Class D cargo compartments. The FAA evaluated the recommendation. It determined that the installation of such systems was not cost beneficial. The FAA terminated its rulemaking on the subject. The recommendation died on paper. 8 years later, the exact scenario the NTSB had warned about occurred. The fire detection and suppression systems that could have alerted the crew and bought them time to land safely did not exist because the FAA had decided they were not worth the expense. The investigation required the recovery and examination of wreckage from one of the most hostile environments investigators had ever worked in. Wreckage fragments were pulled from the sawgrass and limestone by teams working in conditions that included standing water, extreme heat, wildlife hazards, and contaminated debris fields. Despite the total destruction of the aircraft, investigators were able to recover scorched seat frames, heat-damaged oxygen generators, partially burned aircraft tires, and sections of the cargo compartment structure showing unmistakable evidence of intense, sustained fire. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were both recovered and provided the timeline that reconstructed the crew's final minutes. The FDR data confirmed normal flight parameters until the moment the electrical systems began to degrade, consistent with a fire progressively destroying wiring and structural components beneath the cabin floor. The CVR provided the sequence of crew communications, passenger shouts, and eventual silence that defined the emergency. Fire testing conducted during the investigation demonstrated that activated chemical oxygen generators placed in contact with cardboard packaging and aircraft tires could generate a self-sustaining fire with temperatures and oxygen levels sufficient to breach a sealed cargo compartment ceiling in a matter of minutes. The tests confirmed that the Class D compartment design was fundamentally incapable of containing a fire fed by its own oxidizer source. The organizational analysis revealed layers of failure that extended far beyond the immediate handling of the oxygen generators. ValuJet had grown from 2 aircraft to approximately 50 in roughly 2.5 years. This expansion was made possible in part by outsourcing nearly all heavy maintenance to contractors including SaberTech. But ValuJet's oversight of SaberTech was inadequate. The NTSB found that ValuJet did not ensure that its contractors' employees were properly trained in hazardous materials handling. SaberTech, in turn, employed many casual and underpaid workers. The facility had no formal system for tracking the handling and disposition of hazardous materials in its shipping and receiving area. Mechanics signed off work card steps they had not completed. Generators were tagged as unserviceable but not labeled as hazardous. The shipping and receiving personnel who prepared the generators for transport did not know, and were not required to know, that the items they were packaging were dangerous. The ValuJet work card itself, though taken directly from McDonnell Douglas procedures, was being used by SaberTech for the first time. There was no institutional familiarity with the task. The FAA's oversight of both ValuJet and SaberTech was also found deficient. The FAA's principal maintenance inspector responsible for ValuJet was managing a workload that the NTSB considered excessive. Inspections of SaberTech by the FAA were infrequent and incomplete, and at a structural level, the FAA operated under a dual mandate. Congress had charged the agency with both regulating aviation safety and promoting the growth of the aviation industry. These two objectives were in direct conflict. Enforcing safety, grounding airlines, requiring costly upgrades, could hinder industry growth. The FAA had institutional incentives to avoid aggressive enforcement. After the crash, FAA Administrator David Hinson acknowledged in congressional testimony that the agency had reacted too slowly to the safety problems it had identified at ValuJet. He stated that the airline's extraordinarily rapid growth had created problems that should have been more clearly recognized and dealt with sooner and more aggressively. Transportation Secretary Federico Pena, who had publicly expressed confidence in ValuJet the day after the crash, announced that he would ask Congress to eliminate the FAA's promotional mandate and focus the agency exclusively on safety. That change was subsequently enacted into law. It was a structural acknowledgement that the FAA had been operating under an inherent contradiction. An agency cannot simultaneously be responsible for ensuring that aircraft are safe and for ensuring that the businesses operating those aircraft are commercially successful. For 3 decades, the FAA had, in many cases, chosen commerce. The crash of ValuJet 592 made that choice visible. What followed was a reckoning. The reforms were substantial. In February 1998, the FAA issued revised standards requiring all Class D cargo compartments to be converted to Class C or Class E, both of which include fire detection and fire suppression equipment. The conversion deadline was set for early 2001. The FAA also tightened regulations governing the transport of chemical oxygen generators, strengthened requirements for hazardous materials training, and implemented new oversight procedures for airlines that outsource maintenance to third-party contractors. ValuJet itself was grounded by the FAA on June 16, 1996, approximately 5 weeks after the crash, following an intensive review that uncovered 34 serious safety violations. The airline was permitted to resume operations on September 30th of that year with a reduced fleet. In 1997, ValuJet acquired AirTran Airways. The merged company adopted the AirTran name. The ValuJet brand had been irreparably damaged. SaberTech became the first American aviation company to be criminally prosecuted for its role in an airline crash. A Florida grand jury indicted the company on 110 counts of manslaughter and 110 counts of third-degree murder. In the federal case, SaberTech was convicted of hazardous materials violations and falsifying records, though most convictions were later overturned on appeal by the 11th Circuit Court. The final federal sentence was a $500,000 fine and 3 years of probation. The company ceased operations in 1999. One SaberTech mechanic, Mauro Otziel Valenzuela Reyes, fled while facing federal criminal charges in 1999. As of 2018, the FBI was still offering a reward for information leading to his arrest. The architecture of this accident is defined by a chain of 7 discrete failures. Mechanics removed the generators without installing shipping caps, then signed the work card as complete. The generators were placed in a shipping area without anyone communicating their hazardous nature. A stock clerk packaged them in cardboard boxes and labeled them as empty. The boxes were shipped to the ValuJet ramp as non-hazardous company material. A ramp agent accepted them without meaningful verification. The first officer approved the loading without questioning the cargo description, and the boxes were placed into a cargo compartment that had no ability to detect or suppress the fire they would start. Every one of those steps represented a point where the chain could have been broken. A single person asking the right question, applying the right label, or installing the right cap would have been sufficient. No one did, not because they were negligent in the ordinary sense, but because the system in which they operated did not require them to. The procedures were inadequate. The training was insufficient. The oversight was absent. The regulatory framework was compromised by competing institutional interests. The fire detection and suppression technology that could have saved Flight 592 was not experimental. It was not novel. It was not theoretical. It existed. It was in use on military aircraft. It was available for commercial installation. The NTSB had recommended it in 1988. The FAA had decided it was not cost-effective. The cost-benefit analysis that led to that decision assigned a monetary value to the expected frequency and severity of cargo compartment fires and weighed it against the cost of equipping every Class D hold in the commercial fleet. The analysis concluded that the cost of compliance exceeded the projected benefit. This is the logic of acceptable risk. Every regulatory system operates on it. The question is not whether risk is acceptable in the abstract. The question is, who decides what level of risk is acceptable, and whether the people bearing that risk are aware of the calculation. The passengers on Flight 592 were not aware. They did not know that the cargo hold beneath them had no fire detection and no fire suppression. They did not know that the boxes loaded alongside their luggage contained chemical devices capable of generating temperatures hot enough to melt the floor they were sitting on. The decision to leave them unprotected had been made on their behalf by institutions operating under constraints that had nothing to do with the 110 people who boarded that aircraft on a Saturday afternoon in Miami. The accident that destroyed ValuJet Flight 592 was not caused by a single person, a single decision, or a single failure. It was produced by 7 ordinary actions, each one explicable, each one insufficient, that together placed an incendiary device in an unprotected space beneath 110 people who had no idea it was there. The NTSB named all 3 institutions as probable causes. The fire detection and suppression systems that were subsequently mandated now exist on every commercial aircraft that carries passengers in the United States. The Class D compartment is gone. The FAA's dual mandate is gone. These changes are the direct legacy of 110 people who did not survive to see them. The margin between acceptable risk and catastrophe is not measured in probability. It is measured in consequences. And the consequences of ValuJet Flight 592 were absolute.